All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling what I think a lot of people would say is the most exciting fixture of the Champions League quarterfinals.
I think a lot of people would agree with you there. Absolutely a massive matchup.
Arsenal versus Real Madrid.
Yeah. And I think we've got a lot to dig into here. We've gone through a pretty lengthy and passionate discussion among some commentators and also some excerpts from a football preview show.
Right. So we've kind of synthesized the key takeaways for people so they don't have to listen to like hours and hours of analysis. We've got it right here.
Absolutely.
Our mission really is to equip you with the knowledge to understand all the tactical things going on, who the key players are, how they might line up, even some predictions about who might win, all that.
Yeah, and really kind of give a bit of a primer before this huge clash.
Okay, so where do we even begin to unpack all of this?
Well, I think one thing that came through really strongly from the sources is this kind of contrasting atmosphere around the two clubs, particularly on the Arsenal side. It's very much under Arteta, it's very clear what they're going to do. They have a very structured way of playing, and they're very good at it.
Yeah, you kind of know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And Real Madrid, of course, Champions League pedigree. You know, they've won it so many times.
Yeah.
And just that kind of, like, you always feel like they can turn it on. They can score a goal out of nothing. They can,
Absolutely. The magic of the Champions League is alive and well with Real Madrid.
And it even led to this brief kind of look back at 2006 when Arsenal actually beat Real Madrid.
Yeah, Football Flicks FC, the commentators over there, they made a quick mention of that sort of historical precedent.
Right.
But they were very quick to point out this is a whole new era and that maybe we shouldn't read too much into past results.
Yeah, very different teams, different, styles of play. Yeah, so I think that's fair enough. Okay, so looking at Real Madrid now, one of the biggest debates seems to be around Ancelotti's potential lineup, right? And particularly at right back. Like, who's going to play there?
Yeah, it's a real sort of tactical puzzle he's trying to solve there. Yeah. And a lot of the debate seems to be centered around whether Lucas Vazquez, who's more of a traditional defender, gets the nod, or Fede Valverde, who's more of a midfielder. And this decision obviously then has implications for the midfield as well. Because if Valverde does slot in at right back, you're probably going to see a midfield three of Camavinga, Modric, and Bellingham.
Well, that's a midfield.
Yeah, that's serious.
Okay, so, but then the commentators also spent quite a bit of time talking about what Arsenal bring to the table, right?
Yeah, and I think what came through really strongly was just their overall strength. They really highlighted, especially in Football Flicks FC, that statistically, according to them, Arsenal have the strongest defense in the Premier League. They've also got the fourth best possession-based game in the league. And they are particularly effective, actually, with these sort of deep attacks. They're ranked third in that metric.
And the commentators were very keen to point out Martinelli and Odegaard as the creative sources.
Yeah.
The guys who can kind of unlock things.
Absolutely.
And then also Declan Rice, his tendency to make these late runs into the box.
Yeah, he's becoming a real goal threat, isn't he, from that midfield position. So you're looking at, kind of a clash of styles in a way. You've got Arsenal, who are very good defensively, very structured going forward, up against Real Madrid, who have got this, experience, but also that sort of individual brilliance.
Yeah. And then we also have to consider that Mbappe is actually in really good form right now for Madrid.
Absolutely, yeah. He's been unplayable at times. And also, the return of Courtois, I think, is something that the commentators were very keen to point out. One of them even said it sort of changes everything, having him back in goal.
Oh, wow.
It's a huge boost for them defensively. But it's not all sunshine and roses for Real Madrid. The absence of both Tchouaméni and Ceballos, I think, was a point of concern for a lot of the commentators. And they were saying that it leaves their midfield lacking a bit of kind of defensive bite.
Right, so it could really affect that balance.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's turn our attention now to player availability, because obviously that's going to have a huge impact on the potential lineups, right? Who's definitely out, who's a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for Real Madrid, first of all, I think it's pretty clear from Football Flicks FC that both Lunin and Ceballos are definitely out for this match.
Yeah, they're confirmed absentees. No question about it.
And for Arsenal, the big question mark seems to be over Bukayo Saka.
Right.
Whether he's going to be fit or not.
Yeah, he's a real doubt and obviously a huge player for them, especially on that right-hand side.
Big loss if he's not available.
Absolutely.
And we also know that Gabriel Jesus is still out.
Yeah, he continues to be sidelined. So it's interesting to see how the potential lineups were kind of being laid out. Football Flicks FC actually showed a couple of different scenarios for both teams, depending on the kind of tactical choices that were made. So for Arsenal, for example, there was some talk about Marino possibly playing as a false nine.
Okay, so for anyone who doesn't really know what that means, essentially a false nine is like an attacking midfielder who plays in the center forward position. So instead of making those runs in behind the defense, they tend to drop a bit deeper, link up the play, create space for the wingers. So potentially a bit of a more fluid attack there from Arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then for Real Madrid, as we said, it really hinges on that right back position. Do they go with that sort of defensive solidity of Valverde, or do they go with a more natural fullback in Lucas Vazquez?
It seems like that's the big question mark for them. And then the commentators also mentioned a few other players who could potentially feature, depending on those tactical calls, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Arsenal, we heard names like Timber, Saliba, Kiwior, potentially even Luis Skelly was mentioned at one point.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay.
And then Partey was also mentioned in midfield as a potential option. And then for Real Madrid, regardless of who plays right back, I think it seems pretty likely that Fran Garcia will start at left back with, probably Rudiger and Militam as that center back pairing. And then, of course, going forward, you've got almost certainly Vinicius and Rodrigo flanking Mbappe.
Right. A very scary front three.
Absolutely terrifying. But I think one thing that really stood out for me was just how strongly some of the commentators felt about Ancelotti's potential defensive selections. There was a real reluctance from some of them to see both Lucas Vazquez and Alaba, who, remember is coming back from a long injury layoff. And apparently, according to them, hasn't been in great form.
Yeah, right.
To see them both lining up against this Arsenal attack that we were just talking about.
So it seemed like there was a real preference for Valverde and Fran Garcia as the fullbacks for Madrid in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. They seem to think that that's the best option. And they were also really emphasizing the impact of Tchouaméni's suspension on Real Madrid's setup. Because as one of the commentators pointed out, if Tchouaméni was available, it would likely free up Valverde to play right back without leaving that midfield too exposed defensively. Yeah. So his absence kind of, really changes things for Ancelotti.
Okay, so I think that brings us nicely onto some of the key talking points and, let's be honest, some of the more controversial bits of the sorts.
Got a little heated, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the discussion around Ancelotti's management, I think, was pretty lively. There were definitely some question marks raised about his potential team selection for this game, and this kind of opened up into a wider conversation about, his tenure at Real Madrid in general.
There were kind of mentions of potential fatigue within the team, the pressure he's under at a club like Real Madrid, and even some comparisons to Arteta and how he's perceived, kind of outside of Spain.
It seems like Ancelotti, every decision he makes, it's being scrutinized right now.
Absolutely. Every move he makes is under the microscope.
Yeah.
And this then led to some, I think, quite surprisingly strong opinions on the potential outcome of the match. Some of the commentators were actually saying that if Real Madrid field what they consider to be a defensively vulnerable lineup, then Arsenal could actually be in for a fairly comfortable win.
Wow, that's a big call against Real Madrid. Right? To say that they could comfortably beat them in a Champions League quarterfinal.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of underline that level of concern that some people have about, that potential defensive fragility, if you like. But then this viewpoint was kind of countered by others who were saying, look, it's going to be much closer than that. Real Madrid's experience in these knockout ties in the Champions League will probably prove to be the decisive factor. Yeah. So you've got this real kind of divergence in expectations.
Yeah, and the goalkeeping situation was also a big talking point, wasn't it, with Courtois potentially coming back for Real Madrid?
Yeah, I mean, the contrast was made with Arsenal's keeper, Raya, who, while they were saying he's had a decent season, he does tend to play quite high up the pitch.
Right.
Which, against a team like Real Madrid, who have the pace of Vinicius and Mbappe, could be a real vulnerability. So, those fine margins, I guess.
Yeah, really interesting. Now, I have to say, though, our primary source, the Texto Pegado discussion, they did go off on a few tangents. As these football discussions tend to do.
As they often do, yeah. They went down a few rabbit holes.
So just to kind of, for the listeners, there were some quite strong opinions aired about a past Barcelona league title.
Right.
And there were allegations of financial irregularities involved in that. There was also quite a bit of discussion about the Rafinha red card incident.
Yeah, and that whole debate around double standards.
Yeah, Exactly. And even the ongoing penalty-taking situation at Real Madrid, it seems like they had a lot to get off their chest.
It was a wide-ranging conversation for sure, but I think for our purposes here, the key thing to remember is that our focus is on this Arsenal versus Real Madrid quarterfinal.
Yeah, let's keep it on track.
Absolutely. So bringing it back to the main event, the commentators did actually share their percentage predictions for both this tie and the Barcelona-Borussia Dortmund tie.
Oh. Interesting. Yeah. So that gives us a kind of a snapshot of, how they see the chances of the Spanish clubs going into these games. All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what have we learned? I think we've seen that tactically it's going to be a really interesting battle. Arsenal's structure versus Real Madrid's experience and individual brilliance.
Yeah, and we've also seen that there are some key absences and some big doubts over the fitness of some really important players on both sides.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a real kind of like disagreement even about how Ancelotti might set his team up.
Yeah, and ultimately how this game is actually going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, the beauty of the Champions League is you just never know what's going to happen. It's so unpredictable.
Absolutely. That's why we love it.
So as you settle down to watch this game, hopefully this deep dive has given you a bit of a kind of deeper understanding of the key factors at play and, what the different perspectives are out there.
Absolutely. And I think, to leave you with something to ponder, considering the contrasting tactical approaches and the debates surrounding team selection, what single factor do you think will be most decisive in determining the outcome of this match?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, think about it. Think about everything we've discussed and, what do you think will be the key? And be sure to join us next time because we'll be dissecting the result of this match and seeing how accurate those predictions were.
Always fun to look back and see who was right and who was wrong.
Absolutely. All right, thanks for diving deep with us.
Until next time.